All right, great. So now I can share it with anybody that's not going to be here right at this moment. But thank you for joining myself and Dr. Jessie Mahoney. We are here to discuss acceptance in parenting and how that plays into having a mindful approach to your parenting. So just to give a little introduction for Dr. Mahoney, she is a board certified pediatrician, and then also she's a certified life coach. She teaches yoga and mindfulness, and she's a physician wellness healer. So Dr. Mahoney has a history of practicing pediatrics at Kaiser Permanente for 20 years. And now she leads her own coaching business, which is called Pause and Presence. I love the name. And obviously that's your philosophy, and one reason I wanted to have you here as a guest. She's also a founding leader of the Mindful Healthcare Collective, as well as an assistant volunteer clinical professor of pediatrics at UCSF. So please join me in welcoming her. One other point of introduction is that she's also a mom and a wife. She has 3 children, and 2 of them I think are a bit older. Are they in their 20s?
Yeah, I have a 20-year-old and a 24-year-old. So my 24-year-old was my med school baby, and a residency baby who is 20, who's not a baby, none of them are. And my youngest is about to be 15. So,
oh,
and
great.
I have 3 boys.
Well, I know there are some parents in the challenge that have teenagers. So yeah. I'd love to hear your take on that as we get into this discussion, because a lot of us are dealing with younger kids. So we've talked a lot about toddler parenting and, parenting young kids that are throwing fits and things like that. It definitely changes as they get a bit older.
Well, teenagers throw fits. They just look different.
Yeah.
Even adults throw fits, but they look different. So
yeah.
That's how I like to think about it. I'm like, oh, this is just, a different way of having a temper tantrum, and that's okay.
Love it. So this last week in the challenge, we focused on having a present moment awareness and how to kind of cultivate that with your kids. So this next week in week 2, I was going to kind of shift the focus over to acceptance and how that plays a role in mindful parenting. It's one of my favorite topics. So I'm glad you were able to come and discuss this with me. So as we get going, I just like to kind of open it up for people that aren't as familiar with mindfulness, which I think there are quite a few in the group for this challenge that don't regularly practice. Can you just give us your take on what acceptance means to you in a general sense?
Well, acceptance is, so one main component of mindfulness is non-judgment. And so acceptance for me ties really into the non-judgment. It also ties into presence because it's truly, it's to me the definition of the word, but it's to not resist. And so many of us resist reality, and we don't even realize that we are resisting reality. Mm-hmm. That's wishing things were different or wanting things to be different, or your child's on the floor having a temper tantrum and just accepting that that's what's happening. And so acceptance ties in for me all the components of mindfulness really, because it's present moment awareness, and you're just, whatever's happening is happening, and not resisting or not changing and not trying to fix it, which is our parental tendency, is to try to fix it immediately, and realizing that so many things are out of our control. So it's deciding if there's something in your control, a safety issue, obviously you need to change that. But otherwise, just accepting it's like what is happening is actually happening, and deciding that we are just going to experience it. That's how it ties into presence for me.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It's actually the reason I put acceptance in week 2, because the week 3 theme is non-judgment. And I feel like acceptance is this bridge between the presence and the non-judgment. It really ties so well into both, in giving us this attitude towards our life in this moment, which has become a lot more challenging recently with the pandemic.
Absolutely. So, I think for me, I think of mindfulness as almost a way of life. Like, it doesn't have to be, you can add it into your life along the way. That's how I bring it into my life. And that's where I think so many of these tenets of it overlap. And I actually had a hard time kind of pulling them out. Okay, well, what's exactly acceptance? But it is a bridge to many of the other components, and super important in parenting, obviously, and in parenting in this moment when there's so much out of our control. So our best bet is acceptance, really.
Yes, totally. The pandemic has changed a lot. So I do have one question that was submitted about that. So maybe we could start with that one, because it seems like a good lead-in.
Sure.
So So our lives have changed drastically during the pandemic, and many parents are struggling with being home more and balancing working from home with homeschooling and then the lack of socialization of their kids. So how do you feel acceptance plays a role in this? How can acceptance help us with these challenges?
Well, my take on it is that that is the reality right now. So we have COVID, we can't be socializing, our kids can't be at their classes. And I am of the opinion that it's better to see it as an opportunity and see all of the new things that we can do in this moment. And interestingly, before COVID, we all wanted to spend more time at home with our families and have less to do. And now we all want more to do and are sort of worrying about the impact. So I like to think of parenting as a long game, and whether they have, you know, a year or two, I don't know how long it's going to go on, where they spend more time at home and less time socializing, they're going to get something out of that as well. So rather than looking at what we've lost, looking at where the abundance is and accepting the situation as it is. And so when we resist the homeschooling and resist all of the missed for older kids, you know, prom. My son is a baseball player and he's my 15-year-old and very much missing, you know, they can't play a game and he's missed all of his season, and he's, you know, and this sense that like when you're resisting it and not accepting just the situation, and I've been trying to encourage him to take up something else like a solo sport for right now because that's what he can do. So this idea that looking at it as an opportunity, what can they gain from this rather than what they're losing? Because I think the energy we spend on resisting it rather than accepting it is a lot of energy. And so seeing it as an opportunity, I think just changes your mindset about it. And that can be very, very helpful. It doesn't mean that it's not hard. I just want to make sure that's not, you know, we can accept without liking it. And so I don't think anybody likes that we have a pandemic and people who are working and homeschooling. Nobody loves having both of those jobs. But how can this be an opportunity or a learning experience instead of just sort of beating our head against a wall about all the things they're missing? What's the opportunity here? And maybe even trying to make something different of it. You know, can they learn something completely new? Or it may be, I mean, my mind says our education system wasn't perfect to start. So maybe we can make it more creative, or, you know, you can learn things from cooking and learn things from cleaning and learn things. And so I think we have to just be more creative and more curious in our thinking about it, because that allows us to accept rather than be exhausted and trying to figure out how can I make all the things happen that were happening before.
Yeah, I love that. Like bringing creativity into it, I think is so important. Because you can get really just bogged down and doing the same thing every day and feeling kind of pulled up, you know? So like one thing we did with our younger kids was we had this schedule that we wrote on the board to try to have a sort of routine to the days when we were completely isolated at home. And in that, there were like different sections of the day where they could do different types of creative work. Like in the morning, we had a time frame where, hey, do you want to bake? Or do you want to do an art project? Or do you want to help fold laundry? You know, and these were all like listed on the board as options, but it was within a certain time frame so that we were still following a routine that kind of was similar from day to day.
I think that's the thing, work with what you have and work with the child that you have. I mean, I have 3 kids who are completely different. And so different things work for different kids. And this is your chance to sort of figure out which kid you have, or which 3 kids you have, or 4 kids you have, and how can you set up something that works for everybody. And that's that creativity and curiosity. Try things. Like, you don't have to get it right. I love to think about things as research and development, which is a very mindful thing. It's just try it. And if it doesn't work, you try something else. And so this is the perfect opportunity for that. Nobody's been a parent in a pandemic before. So all bets are off. So try things and see what happens. And again, maybe this is a great opportunity for all of us. I think so many of us thought life was moving too fast, and now it's slowed down. And so what can we learn from it, and where do we want to go from here? And if our kids could see us take that approach, I think they would be more comfortable too, particularly teens, when they see you just going with the flow. And maybe it's not at all easy, and I don't mean to say that, but even when they see you work through the challenge and respond to it in a way that's creative and curious rather than just wanting it to be different, they learn from that.
Yeah. What you were saying about having 3 completely different kids, I find that so remarkable. We have three also. They're 8, 6, and 4. And I just can't believe how different they are from one another. I mean, they have the same two parents and they have the same environment that they're growing up in. So how can they be that unique? But it is amazing to see how you kind of have to be a different parent for each one.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is also a moment, you know, in the past, our kids were all in separate spaces, and actually mine are mostly in separate spaces now, but they can all teach one another and learn from one another. And that has been the coolest thing, at least with my kids, is watching how they interact. And they didn't have as much interaction before because they were all involved in life outside. And when a lot of that got canceled, you know, the older ones can teach the younger ones and they can learn from different personalities. And that does get into the acceptance of it, right? This is what we have. That's a saying I use a lot in coaching, right? This is what we have today. And so how can we adapt to it?
Yeah. It looks like Allison wrote in about one of her children has ADHD, and that was a topic that we wanted to discuss today with you. So how can mindful parenting help to deal with the challenges that arise with children that have ADHD? Specifically, some other members of the group mentioned having difficulty maintaining their patience during times of struggle. And I know you have a child and a husband who both have ADHD.
So my youngest is totally different than the others. And he has, I would say, pretty significant ADHD. Even as a pediatrician, you know, I didn't want to treat it, and now I do, and he needs it. And he's very clear, like, that's just the way it is. So, for me, it involves tremendous patience and tremendous acceptance. And so again, early on, I found myself resisting the fact that he had it, right? And I just wanted to make him, and this might make me sound like a bad parent, but the same as his brothers. I knew what worked and I would just want to do that. And realizing that for him, that doesn't work. And so this idea of curiosity and creativity and trying different things and realizing it's that sort of ultimate acceptance. This is what you have. This is the child you have. These are the traits that they have. And when we try to put them in that box, and the box perhaps of school, or the box perhaps of however we think they should want to be, my time. Now he can. He's a hungry 15-year-old, so now he does sit in there. He couldn't make that. So I think this idea that when we fight it all the time, it just becomes a source of more conflict and more tension. And so I think it starts with presence. And I found that patience came from really just like stepping outside of yourself and stepping back, even being mindful at dinner, instead of being annoyed that like he was fidgeting and getting up and doing, I just sort of described in my head what he would be doing and allowed that. And I think if you accept them as they are, as imperfect as they may be, we're also imperfect. And so that actually, this sort of approaching it with compassion and acceptance, and to me, compassion is a big piece of acceptance. So we're all, you know, I teach yoga, and a lot of what we talk about in yoga is being like perfectly imperfect, and all the things that you can't do are exactly the way they're supposed to be, right? And so this idea that our kids are exactly how they're supposed to be. And so sometimes kids with ADHD can be quite, I'm just going to use the word annoying, like they just, it gets to you and you notice your heart rate rising and all of those things. And so for me, just noticing that and being like, oh, right, this is, you know, something that makes me get, it's not really anxious, it's more irritated, and hopefully he's not listening to me from anywhere. It's not, but it's just, it's room there. Yeah, I hope so. I was saying, and I was like, oh, I really hope, I don't think he's anywhere near, but the doors are closed. But, and I don't actually mean it in a critical way. It's just that that's my reaction. And so if I resist that reaction, then I just find myself very frustrated. Whereas if I just identify it and say, oh, right, you know, he actually still makes kind of a humming noise a lot. And it just drives me, I'm just like, you need to stop. But the more I argue about it, the more upset you get. Whereas if I just say, oh, right, this is what he does. I can take a deep breath. I can say, you know, you might want to stop, because he often doesn't even notice that that's what he's doing. And for littler kids, you know, it's jumping up and down and doing the things that they do, but fighting the reality of it just makes it worse for everyone. So for me, it's noticing, stepping back and pausing, and that presence of just describing what's going on around you can be really powerful without being in it, because it kind of gives you your power back. Then that irritation's not in the driver's seat. You're deciding that, oh, right, I'm irritated and this is what's happening. And then accepting them as they are, and realizing and accepting you as you are. So it's okay that you're irritated too, right? And you might be someone who really likes sit quiet and calm, and finding space for everybody is something I think is really helpful. So accepting you as the parent, because oftentimes we beat ourselves up. Well, I should be fine with this and you're not, or it's not okay and everyone may be judging. And that gets back to this acceptance, to me, of parenting as the long game. We think that every moment and what we do in this moment is going to play out to that, something super important. And kids are resilient and adults are resilient. And I've seen with my kids, I think it's easier when they get older. Now I look back and I'm like, it doesn't matter if we do this or not. It doesn't matter if he can do this. The other ones turned out okay. And I didn't, try to change and fix everything. And that's, to me, another piece of acceptance, right? We can't fix everything. And if you think that your meds will make them act like someone who doesn't have ADHD, it won't, because they do, right? And that's them. And it actually, again, flipping it to an opportunity. A lot of kids with ADHD are really good at certain things. And my son he can actually focus tremendously well on the things he's passionate about. And so figuring out what those are and capitalizing on that, especially during this time of COVID, where we have more flexibility in education. My 15-year-old loves math. And so I've actually he's done all this extra math because he will focus on that. But some of the other stuff he doesn't love and can't focus, and I can't be the one who's sort of supervising all the time. So I was like, well, this is going to be the year of math because you like it and you're into it, so figuring out, again, who your child is, accepting who they are, and then taking the good with the bad. I guess it's just it's all part of the whole.
Yeah.
That'd be my take on it.
That's really good advice for anyone that's a parent, whether their child has ADHD or not. I think, you can't be wonderful at everything. And it's really wonderful for you as a parent to take the time to figure out what each child does well and help them to build that.
Well, and I think a lot of people are really hesitant about getting a diagnosis for their kid. And I would just say, I think it was so helpful for me, because once I realized that that's what was going on, then it's like, well, how do you work with it? And they're going to be working with it their whole life. And my husband was not diagnosed as a kid. And so he's kind of struggled his whole life trying to do jobs. He has a job which is not the perfect job for someone with ADHD. He's in front of a computer all day, And so my youngest said, I need a job that's outside. I should be a this or that. And so I think having them just realize what their strengths are, this is an opportunity to figure out who they are and what they love. And that, again, gets back to this acceptance, right? If we all just accept who we are innately and stop resisting who we think we should be, then everybody does better.
Yeah.
And I think I just had one other thought, which is this idea of we also resist who we think they should be, right? We think everyone's judging us for how our kids are acting and all of that. And when we let go of all those shoulds, which to me is, again, acceptance, then things for everybody feel so much better. You don't have as much internal angst when they're doing whatever they're doing. And often when we drop our internal angst, some of what they're doing calms down as well. When we're calm, you create a more calm energy for everybody.
Yeah. As you're talking, I'm kind of thinking about the upcoming week's exercises. And I think there's one where I talk about acceptance in two different forms in parenting. I mean, there's the acceptance of this moment, and it is what it is, and you got to deal with it, whether you like it or not. It might be a behavior that's going on that's not what you want, but guess what? It's here. So, you struggling and resisting it is just going to perpetuate the problem, because the energy changes when you have that type of attitude towards it. So there's that acceptance, but there's also the acceptance of your child, and like you were just saying, you might have this picture in your mind of, my child should be this way, and I want them to grow up to be exactly like this, and that may not be who they are, so we need to work on accepting our children for who they are, which is not an easy task sometimes. But
right. Well, and we often don't accept ourselves as we are either, right? We want things to change. And so I think, and again, you don't have to like all of it. I think sometimes we think we have to like and love every bit of it, but we don't. We really do have to accept it, because we can't change it, right?
Yeah. I was just thinking about a question that somebody wrote in. It kind of relates to this. Let me see if I can find it. Well, actually, two of these questions relate to what we're talking about. So one from Brianna, She asks, I'd like to decrease the expectations I put on myself to perform as a parent in social situations. She says she has less patience with the children because she wants them to act in a certain way or act right when they're in a public situation. And so that's a challenge for her. She wants the kids basically to maintain self-regulation and to act in the way that she has taught them. Otherwise, how will she look as a parent? She's worried about how she's perceived. So
Right.
any suggestions on how acceptance can help there?
Well, acceptance is really the only option there, right? Because we think, I mean, our children's behavior is actually out of our control. If you think about it, even with a toddler, you try to have them stop having the temper tantrum or sit on them. It doesn't work, right? They just escalate. And so I think the idea that the acceptance is actually going to be the most likely to get her more of the outcomes that she would want, because when we show up with calm energy and like, well, my child's having a temper tantrum in the grocery store, then the temper tantrum lasts a lot shorter. And so when we have this angst and we're trying to stop and we're trying to hold them and we're trying to, you know, we're yelling at them because we're so frustrated and thinking, we just bring that additional energy to it that tends to make things spiral more out of control. I had a client who I worked with. Yeah. Well, and I had a client who I worked with who said that when she just, so we talked about temper tantrums as being like, well, kids just need to reset. That's sort of like they just do their little thing and then they reset. And when you think about it like that, you can show up with a very different kind of a calmness. And so she said that she did this and her daughter looked at her about a couple minutes in and then just walked over and like climbed in her lap and was like, huh, you know, so she had, but I do think they need to diffuse it all, right? So it's not going to not happen. But I actually think acceptance is the path forward. If you think about it that way, it's going to get you to where you need to be a lot more quickly because of that change in energy. And then the same idea about self-judgment, which is really your topic for next week, but the idea that when we judge ourselves, we're coming at it with resistance as opposed to acceptance. So judgment is not helping anybody either. And then I will go back to this idea of the long game of parenting. And everybody has kids and everybody's kids have tantrums and some are worse than others. And the other thing is that kids have phases. I often think like sometimes 3 months and sometimes it's like every 3 years, they go through these really difficult phases and then they go out of it, right? And so we tend to judge ourselves and think their behavior is about us or it's about our parenting when it's really not. And so just realizing this is a phase, it's all temporary is another sort of mindfulness approach. So we accept it in the moment they're having their temper tantrum and then it's done. Because whether you sit there and judge yourself or not doesn't really impact the tantrum except to possibly make it worse.
Yeah, I think too, like going back to, you briefly mentioned it earlier, but the fact that just having acceptance in that moment doesn't necessarily mean you're condoning the behavior. You know, you're not saying, oh, you know, this is okay that with me that they're doing this. No, you're saying this is okay, this is what it is right now. But at the same time, you have discernment as a parent that this is not the behavior you want to encourage. But I think like out in the grocery store as the tantrum's going on or whatever the example is, that's not the time to teach your child that, you know, like they need to see from you that you calmly accept what's going on. It will help diffuse the situation. And then later you go back and discuss with them what proper behavior is, you know.
Right, and it isn't that you're saying they can have temper tantrums or teens can do whatever at all, but in that moment, it is what it is. And oftentimes when we just allow and accept the moment, it's shorter, everyone suffers less, and then kids will actually often be able to describe what happened and be able to come up with a solution and say, you know, one of my kids never liked going to the grocery store. It's the ADHD one. It's too busy, too much stimulation. Yeah. He would want stuff. It was just too overwhelming. And so to actually realize that maybe you have a kid for whom that doesn't work. And it's again, accepting the child you have and just allowing that to be, and if you have to take them, fine. And if you don't have to take them, you can avoid and set yourself up for more success. But I don't think anyone's saying, you know, they should keep hitting or kicking or biting or whatever it might be. But when you resist that they're doing it and everyone's getting more upset, it doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I think too, if you're worried about people judging you, most of the time, I think we're harder on ourselves than other people are on us, you know? And so trying to look at it from a perspective of probably a lot of these people were parents once too. And I don't know a single parent who haven't had a child like throw a fit or have a bad behavior in public, you know? So people probably aren't judging you. You're more judging yourself, which is something that
they may in fact be feeling tremendous compassion for you, remembering their own experience years ago. I will actually say now that I'm not traveling with toddlers and I'm traveling with teens, I look at all the people, I'm not traveling anywhere right now, but but I used to look at people and think like, I'm so glad I'm not traveling with toddlers, but I'm sure other people are looking at me, I'm so glad I'm not traveling with a bunch of teenage boys, you know? So I think people have more compassion than we think. And if they don't, it's really their issue. It's not our issue.
Yeah. So I did see a question on here on the Facebook feed. I have to keep checking over there. So it is from Shayna. Hi, Shayna. How are you? We are learning the nurtured heart approach to parenting. Has anyone else heard of or practiced this?
I don't know it. Do you?
I don't either. No, I've never heard of it. So share with us a little bit about that in the group, Shayna, because I'll check into it. It sounds, I love the name, but I don't know personally much about it. And I guess you don't either.
I don't either. I've never heard of it. Yeah. I think, there's so many different approaches to parenting, and I don't think there's a right one. I think it's always a fit, right? We're all, not only are children different, we're all different parents. And so figuring out what works for you. And that, again, comes back to acceptance, right? Figure what works for you and what works for your children and solve problems that way. I think so many of us feel like there's a right way and we have to sign our child up for the right thing. And if we don't do this, then it will lead to this and it will lead to that. And just figure out what works for you and figure out what works for your kids, because you're actually a unit. You're not, you can't separate everyone out, right? So choose, if something resonates with you and feels like it works for you. I do see people get in trouble because a mom or a dad will want a specific thing, like this resonates with me, but it doesn't resonate with the children or a child, or it worked with the first child but not the second child, and then you need to just start over, right? Or have different strategies. We're not all the same, and so have different strategies for different kids and different.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that I've loved about mindful parenting is that I don't really feel like it's a recipe for parenting. Like a lot of the books I had read in the past are like, you follow X, Y, and Z, and then your child will behave this way, And really what mindful parenting is more of a way of being in your life that allows you to enjoy the moments more, and to not get caught up in all these emotions that, maybe sometimes they're carried over from our childhood, from the way we were raised, or things that come up from the past that will kind of overtake us in terms of our emotions. It's a way to deal with that so that you can kind of put that aside and be with your child. So I look at it more as like a way of being with the family and the kids rather than a recipe for parenting.
Yeah, I think it's more of a way of life. And it's actually, the other thing is it's for you. Sometimes we think about acceptance as, oh, I'm accepting it to let someone get away with something, or we're accepting it because it works better for us and allows us to be in the moment and live our lives in a way that feels more comfortable.
So Allison says, will this be posted to the group? Yes, this will remain in the group. I'm also recording it, so I'll send you an email with a link to it, Allison. I'd love for my husband to watch the replay. Thank you so much. Parenting has been hard during COVID without a break, less of a village, and both of us working from home. I'm in tears that you put this into words. It's been so hard to have the structure that my child needs, and we are able to enter virtual schooling. We are trying to figure it out, and this is great timing. We've been working on being less rigid, but we also have to accept the amount of structure that helps them feel grounded. I do find that structure really helps, like even in a homeschool environment, to have a plan in place for each day has been helpful for us.
Yeah, and every kid is different. So if your kid needs structure, and I actually think we all need structure, and that may be one of the things that the people who feel a bit adrift, even myself, feel more adrift, because you know, things are just different. And whether it's even driving your kids to school was your structure. And so recreating that and having some plan for the day, if that feels comfortable to you and comfortable to your child, that's exactly what we want to do. So figuring out what works for you, and rather than sort of feeling you're a victim of the circumstances, just figure out how to make it work for everybody.
Yeah.
Given what you've got.
Here's a really good question. So this came up a lot in the group when we were talking about what's been the biggest challenge in parenting as of late. So what advice do you have for parents that are struggling with yelling at their kids and feeling like they reach a breaking point and snap?
I'll go right to my pause and presence. That's really, you know, to the pause is really the key thing. So there's the famous Viktor Frankl quote in mindfulness, which is, between the stimulus and the response, that's where your power and control lie. And so the stimulus is whatever they're doing to make you angry. And we tend to react. That's where we yell and lose it. And so just realizing that in that millisecond is where your power, if you want to call that, I like to call it control, or it's really just your opportunity. You could also label it. And the idea that you have to just catch that millisecond, that's creating a pause. And many of us hold our breaths. And so just when you notice, just even the feeling, you just begin to notice. For me, it's always in my chest. I think some people it's in their head and some people it's in their throat. But as soon as you notice the feeling, whatever your feeling is, where you are getting upset, you pause and decide so you can then respond intentionally. And that's sort of the secret to me, the recipe for mindfulness and for parenting. We can't change the stimulus, whatever they just did, but we can change how we show up for it. And it doesn't mean that you just allow it either, but it's just taking that pause and being more deliberate and intentional. And the breath is a key component of mindfulness, and it's very healing, and it actually changes your whole physiology. And we can do it wherever. You can do it in the grocery store line when your kid is having a temper tantrum, or, you know, whenever your teen is doing whatever they're doing, you just pause and start by taking a deep breath. And if you can do 3, even better. There's no rush. I think we feel like there's a rush. The only time in my mind, you know, there's a rush if there's a safety issue. If your toddler's running into the street, well, that's a great time. Just scream bloody murder and grab them, right? But they're about to get hit by a car. But otherwise, I think our bodies tell us it's urgent. But that's where, if you can bring mindfulness into it, it's not, most of the time, it's not urgent.
Yeah, I think the trick is, like you said, being able to catch yourself in that millisecond before you react. It's a skill you definitely have to practice. It doesn't just come naturally, I don't think.
Oh, no, right. And mindfulness, that's why mindfulness is a practice.
Yeah. Exactly.
And don't beat yourself up. Again, if you just start by noticing it, you're like, oh, I felt it that time. Next time I'll do better. Oh, I felt it that time. It doesn't, you know, we just do our best. And your kids watching you learn how to do that, even when you make mistakes, is a good lesson for them to learn. Sometimes people feel like parents, you know, we don't want our kids to see us making mistakes, but they learn so much by watching us struggle and learn and come out the other side a stronger person. So if you can even think about it as each time you're working through this and you make a mistake and then you figure out how to do it better next time, that's a beautiful lesson for your kids to learn. And if you can find that millisecond and just take a breath, I actually think you kids watch that and you can kind of see them later on start to take a breath. It's like, oh, they're just learning from you. So there's no rush. And I think we get so upset that I didn't do it right again. But it's just learning, and it's all a practice. Just like our kids aren't perfect, we're not perfect.
Yeah, the breath is so helpful in that too, because as you were saying with physiology, if you take a deep breath or take a breath in which you extend the exhale longer than the inhale, we know that activates the parasympathetic nervous system. And so that is a physical way to calm your body, because our parasympathetic nervous system is what kind of calms us. So, you know, we have proof in that in the literature about meditation and mindfulness and how you can actually calm your nerves with deep breathing. So the other thing I wanted to mention, I don't know if you saw the live I did kind of back way at the beginning of this group, but I talked about a moment we recently took an RV trip, and I had my oldest child I had asked him to like clear off the table in the RV, and he didn't listen very well. And I just lost my mind. Like, I yelled at him, and it was this exact thing that they mentioned here about, feeling like I reached a breaking point and snapped. And then he got very upset, and I, of course, felt shame and guilt afterwards for having treated him that way. And so later I sat down and thought about it, and like, what could I have done differently? And I decided like I needed to apologize to him for yelling at him. And I think that is an example of one thing you can do if you do lose it in the moment, is bring it up with your child. They can learn from seeing you recognize that you're not perfect and you do make mistakes, and that another person is owed the respect of an apology, I guess I would say.
Yeah.
So he responded very well to that when I apologized to him. Of course, he, being a child, almost immediately forgave me, and everything is fine. But
yeah, I think when we mess up, it's actually a good thing for kids to see that. Mm-hmm. And so I think we often beat ourselves up about it, and we don't accept our own mistakes. And if we can accept them and own them, it's the perfect opportunity. So just to see this as a practice, I think also we jump into this idea of mindful parenting. Okay, I'm going to be a mindful parent now, but it takes practice. And even, years and years in, you're not perfect. So it's fine. That's the other piece of acceptance. You just do the best you can in any moment. Mm-hmm. And that's the best that you can do. And you can decide that you want to do better, or try to notice it sooner next time, and be aware and apologize, but nobody's perfect.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite teachers of mindfulness is John Kabat-Zinn. I love his writing. I think he's so eloquent, and the way he describes, mindfulness as the way of being is just beautiful, the way he writes. So I highly recommend, if anybody wants to read a good book. I really loved Wherever You Go, There You Are, which is awesome and beautifully written. But I kind of lost my train of thought of why I was bringing that up. I can't remember what I was going to say about him, but anyway, that's an excellent book. And he also has a mindful parenting book that's really great too. So let's change the subject a little bit here. There's one question that Whitney asked. She wrote in ahead of time. Any suggestions on how to remain present and re-engage in your marriage when you're dealing with multiple toddlers? She often feels that between kids and work, she has very little left to invest in herself and her husband.
Well,
I think we've all been there.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, a part of it is that's the reality of having two toddlers, and especially now, the reality of having two toddlers in a pandemic where most of us don't have babysitters and can't have the date nights and all of those things. So part of it is accepting that. And since we're talking about acceptance, when we're not resisting, we actually end up with a lot more energy. And so you may find that you have more energy in those moments that you have. And just taking mindful moments, they may look very different than they used to. Maybe you're not going out for dinner, or going to a movie, or going to a show, but can you take 5 minutes and just connect in the kitchen when your toddler happens to be entertained with a pot or a pan or a spatula or whatever it might be. And so just taking the moments where they are. And this idea, I think a lot of it comes down to sort of our acceptance, or in coaching, we call it a manual of sort of what we expect a relationship to look like. Mm-hmm. When our kids are little, our relationships look different. And where I think a lot of the disappointment comes, and the frustration and the challenge comes from that disappointment and frustration, is with the expectations. And so if you can just let the expectation go. And again, nobody's been a parent of a toddler in a pandemic before, right? And so whatever it looks like, make the most of 2 minutes. Make a connection that's just, a hug in the kitchen or hand holding on the couch. And it can lead to other things. And so sometimes when we just let go of the bigger expectation of it needs to look like this, and catch those moments wherever you can, I think that makes it easier.
And getting, like you brought in creativity before into the parenting. I mean, creativity into the relationship with your spouse or your significant other, I think is so important too, because like you said, right now we can't go out on all kinds of fancy dates like maybe we used to be able to. Or maybe you don't have those resources, and when you have young kids, it's really hard to get away. So, being a little bit more creative with what you do with one another to maintain that intimate connection. Yeah. Any other input on that?
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking, I think it's the presence of last week, like just finding a way to be present in the moments, even if you're in the living room with the kids doing whatever they're doing, and connect with one another in that way, be present with the person you're with, and have that be, it can be enough in that moment. And maybe when you stop spending a lot of energy searching for something different, you have a little more energy to enjoy the moment, as we say.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I was curious about your experience with your clients and what kind of common thoughts come up in teenage parenting in terms of how that might be helpful to foster an attitude of acceptance.
Yeah, so teens are a practice in acceptance, 100%. And this thought, first of all, that helps me a lot is everything is temporary. And it's much easier for me to see that now that, now I look at my 14-year-old and I think, oh, well, someday he'll be 24. And it looks very different at 24. And I know he's different than his 24-year-old brother, but you sort of see the evolution. And as a pediatrician, you see the evolution. And so kids who had issues at this point may not at that point. So with teens, I really do think it's, everything is temporary. I also feel really strongly, someone actually gave me this advice when my first child hit 13, which was to think of raising teens as you're raising an adult. You're raising someone else's father, husband, because mine are all boys, parent, father, husband, spouse, and to really think about it for the long game and not for the short game. And there, what you want is to teach them to be respectful and to engage. And in order for kids to be respectful, we have to respect them. And so when I started to take that approach as I'm raising an adult, and it's not about me being in charge, and realizing that I'm really not in control, even if I think I am, and it becomes more and more and more clear as your kids get older that you're not in control. And so therefore really figuring out how to have this mutually very connected relationship. For me, what's tricky sometimes is mindful connections, because it may be that what they want to connect about is things that you're not really interested in at all. And that's come up a lot for me recently.
We've got Minecraft in this house.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Minecraft.
Right. And so just realizing that to find something you're connected, or just to listen to them tell the story and to connect with I can connect with being enthusiastic about something, or being excited about something, and being engaged and focused. And so trying to find some way to connect with them mindfully. And I find stepping back from the situation, because like I have a lot of judgments about, mine doesn't do Minecraft anymore, but video games, or he's really obsessed with professional athletes. And I'm just, anyway. And so it's this idea, I'm like, well, he's really enthusiastic. And what am I really enthusiastic about? And sharing in the enthusiasm and excitement about something. And when you see your kid from that vantage point, instead of, well, I don't approve of this, and I don't like this, and I don't want him to do this, then it's no fun. And so finding places that you can connect, and mindfulness has really helped me with that. I can't control what he's interested in. And even if he's doing something that I don't think is the best, I try to just think like, okay, well, this is learning. And what I can control is my voice. I can tell him what I think. I can, control what I do. But I find actually the less I do, and just sort of sharing my thoughts and opinions and having this very respectful, connected relationship has been the most powerful. And this concept to me, whenever I get upset, I'm like, I'm raising an adult, but today is not the most important day. It's, again, that bets are off if it's like safety, but I often tell people if it's not child protective services worthy, like you don't need to get in a fight with your spouse about it, or our job is to keep them safe and healthy. And even as teens, that can be really hard. And so again, our job is to have a relationship where they come to you and you can have these important conversations. So I used to think that parenting toddlers was the hard part. It doesn't actually get any easier. It just gets different. And so it's much more mental. And although then it gets physical again when they stay out late and have problems in the middle of the night. And so it's just different along the way. And if you think about, this thought came to me recently, which is we're actually parents of our children as adults for much, much longer than those first 18 years, hopefully, right? And so I was thinking about my relationship with my parents who are 77, right? And I'm 50. And so my adult relationship has been so much more important. And as we're raising our kids, we're actually building the foundation of that. And that allowed me to be much more mindful and not get too worked up about any little individual incident. And so for teens, that's the secret, because there will be lots of individual incidents and lots of learning and lots of challenges along the way. The other thing is stepping back and giving them space, which is another component of mindfulness. And I tend to not do that very well. My husband's is very good at it. And we had a recent issue with my 24-year-old who's now moved out, and I decided that he should have everything on his own. And so he'd been contributing to his car insurance and contributing to his phone. And so I said, you actually need to, and I know it costs more for him to have his own, but I was like, you need to do it all on your own. And his initial reaction was like, but it costs more money, and why would you do that? And I was like, my husband said, just give him time. And then a week later, he came back to me and said, well, I researched it, and it is really important. I was trying to explain, you need credit, and you need all this stuff. And he came back and he's like, so these are the quotes I got, and I have a question. And so I said nothing in the whole time period, thanks to my husband, because I actually was like, I want to, I can help him with this and jump in and fix it. And so giving them the space to figure it out. And now he felt like he came up with the idea all on his own. Mm-hmm. And so with teens, to me, that's the very, just giving them space to figure it out. And you can sort of plant seeds and see what happens. But when we're so used to jumping in and fixing everything. And when I can step back, and I will take full responsibility for not being as good at that as I could be, it's a practice, right? Yeah. I'm a fixer, I'm a doctor. So I'm like, no, just fix the situation so we can move on quickly. I don't want it on the list. But it's really a mindful practice for me, because it takes a lot of patience and a lot of acceptance that they're not there yet. But then magic things start to happen. And so realizing that in that space, and even with toddlers, that's why you let them finish the tantrum instead of stopping it. They finish, they have their space, and then they can come back and connect. So that's my
obviously I don't have teenagers yet, so I haven't had to directly face it, but I've been one myself, and I remember the power struggle there. But you're reminding me, as you're speaking about, in John Kabat-Zinn and his wife Mila, they wrote this book, Everyday Blessings, for Mindful Parenting. And they talk about it being a triangle. And the sides of the triangle, an equilateral triangle, are acceptance, empathy, and then what they call sovereignty, which I thought was a really unique term to use for what they were trying to get to portray with this word. Because to me, sovereignty is almost a militant-like authoritarianism type word.
Yeah.
It's a good connotation for me. But I think what they were really trying to get across with that is what you're talking about here, which is like having agency over your own life. So you're affording your child the autonomy and agency that they deserve, because they are their own unique individual person, and they may not take their life in the direction that you have dreamed up for them. So
they won't. They'll have their own direction.
Your empathic view of what they're going through, coupled with accepting them as they are and affording them the agency over their own life, which obviously changes as they grow. You can do that when they're little, but when they become teenagers, it's more of I think the focus shifts more towards that agency or sovereignty, as they put it.
It does, though. I think actually it's really important also to realize that your kids are it gets back to their sort of own unique selves, and letting them be that and do that. I think when they're young and school age, we perhaps jump in too much and want them to be what we think they should be. And stepping back and accepting who they are and what they want to do, it often doesn't matter. I think as parents, we think it really matters. You need to do X and you need to do Y, and letting them explore. They want to try this and turns out they don't like it. That's okay. That's all part of the learning process. and realizing that it's a long game and that they're going to turn into the human that they're going to turn into. And our job is to be their guide, but not necessarily be in charge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really a good way to put it. I think we might have covered most of our questions here. Another question, which will be kind of quick, I think, is, you know, tying into your coaching business being called Pause and Presence, the question was about how do parents find time to pause? And I found that to be an interesting question because I think, you know, knowing mindfulness fairly well, I understand what you meant from pause and presence is really a moment-to-moment thing and not necessarily a huge, you know, vacation or something where you step away from your life. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, what I do mean is moment to moment, taking the pause and realizing that we can take a pause. But when you asked the question, it occurred to me that we have to give ourselves permission to pause. And I think often we don't, as parents, give ourselves permission to pause. And realizing that we can sit back and sort of let things happen, and we don't always have to be doing. And so finding moments in the day that you can pause and step back and not, I do see a lot of parent clients who are so worried about the outcome of their child's life and thinking that if they do more and more and more, that it will work out better. And so realizing that there is tremendous power in learning in that pause, like there's tremendous power in boredom. And so allowing your children to get bored and figure out what they can do. And so COVID has maybe offered more of that opportunity, though for some people less if they're working and homeschooling. But giving yourself permission to pause and just be. And if you model that, your kids also begin to see that they can do that too. And so many of us model hard work tremendously well and getting so much done and being productive. And the people who seem to be the happiest in life are the ones who really do sort of take pleasure in like simple pleasures and sitting and being and know how to do that. And so finding the time and realizing you know, we often look at, you know, we can pause on vacation for 2 weeks, but we can't pause until we get there. But can you pause all different times of the day? For a lot of folks, I recommend doing some mindfulness in the car. So maybe if you're coming home from work and you're still going, I know not everyone's going to work, but if you are still going from work, so particularly doctors, between the car and going inside, you know, put in your earbuds and do Calm or Headspace or whatever. It doesn't matter to me which one you do. I like that because there's no thought involved. Really, you just push play and you just pick whatever the next one is. And you have an immediate pause. And even 3 minutes can make a huge difference in your physiology before you show up for the next part of your life. And so starting with tiny pauses and even the millisecond pause, well, more than a millisecond if you're noticing it and taking a deep breath or 2 or 3. Once you start to do that, you actually are able to be more intentional with all the other pauses. So can you take a 5-minute pause? Doesn't have to be, you know, 2 hours or a whole date night or a whole day at the spa. Just, you know, sit in the backyard for 5 minutes with your cup of coffee. Or sometimes this might sound crass, but you can take a pause in the bathroom because no one will bother you as a parent and you can close the door, right? I know that sounds funny, but it's a great hiding place and nobody will bother you.
The closet. I hide in the master closet a lot.
Exactly. They don't know where you are.
Yeah, exactly. Kids are like, "Mommy," putting their hand under the door.
I think mindfulness gives you a pause. If you just even take a moment to be mindful, that's a pause. And so lots of little pauses can add up to a big pause too. And hopefully someday we'll all get big pauses too. But in this crazy moment in time, maybe not so much.
Yeah, I think what I hear you saying is kind of using each moment by moment in the day to try to bring your mind back to what's going on right now is a way of pausing. You know, it's a way of giving yourself space to be present. Yeah, I think one thing, I can't remember where I read this, but in the past I read about looking at mindfulness as a way of being that you can develop in 2 different ways. So you can develop it by having a formal meditation practice, you know, where you sit and you practice noticing your mind, you know, and what's what's going on in there. I mean, you're constantly thinking, and so is everybody else. So you're developing that relationship where you take a step back and you sit and you see what's going on with you today, you know, and how busy your mind is, how much you're struggling against it, how present you can be in that formal practice. That's one way to develop this way of being where you're more mindful in your daily life. But you can also develop it in a more informal practice like you're talking about, where you take moments through the day and allow that to be the way that you become more mindful.
I mean, if you could do both, that's even better.
Exactly. Yeah,
that's my
one
thought.
reason I did the 21-day thing, because I thought, well, you know what? If parents can come in here in this group and do 21 days where they give themselves these 5 to 15 minutes where they sit down and pause, that may help ingrain a habit going forward of having that time that you give yourself. So
I think making it easy and accessible and realizing that nobody's perfect. There isn't a right way. A lot of people feel like, well, I can't be mindful because I don't know how, or I don't know how to meditate. Just do it, and whatever you get is perfect. That's the beauty of mindfulness, right?
Can't be wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll just check here real quick and see if there's any more questions. Whitney really liked your statement. Just fix it quickly so I can take it off the list. She says it's like you plucked that directly from my brain. So, all right, I don't see any questions. I hope I didn't miss any, but as we wrap up here, I just want to ask you about if you can tell us a little bit about where people can find you if they're interested in working with you and what kind of offerings you have.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me, it's actually pauseandpresence.com. And also JessieMahoneyMD.com. So it's Jessie with an IE. That's the only tricky piece of it. So either one of those places. And I work with people both one-on-one, and then I'm starting a group actually a week from tomorrow called Mindful Connections, which is about challenging relationships and establishing mindful connections, essentially with the thought is transforming challenging relationships into amazing ones, basically through mindfulness and connecting and pausing and all of those things. So, and that'll be an 8-week session. If people are interested, that's available too. So, and people can feel free to connect or send me an email. There's a contact me button there if they have questions or want to chat.
That sounds like a worthy cause in this time of our lives. So, yeah. So I really appreciate you joining me, Jessie. It's been really great to talk with you. And I know I see all your work through the Mindful Healthcare Collective, and to be able to personally chat with you has been a real pleasure.
It was fun. I know. We've never personally chatted. So here we are.
So
another plus of these times.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure. And we'll hopefully get to know each other better as we go forward. So have a great day.
Thanks.